Life Audio.
Welcome to the TMUS podcast, where we share how grace, commitment, and cooperation can help couples live the everyday moments of marriage together. Hey everyone, we're Ted
and Ashleigh Slater. Today we're talking with Mike and Carlie Kercheval. They're trained Christian marriage counselors, certified marriage coaches and mentors, best-selling authors, and more. Mike and Carlie also spent years of their marriage as a military couple. Listen in as they share encouragement for other military couples and also offer ideas on how those of us who aren't serving in the armed forces can support those who are. So, Ted, you were born in Germany because your dad was in the military at the time.
It's true. I was born at a very young age over in Germany, which was West Germany at the time.
You're dating yourself there. Your dad was what, in the Army?
He was in the Army. He was an Army doc.
Okay, we actually have his old Army trunk.
Now we have musical instruments in it.
I think it's a mix right now of musical instruments and magazines.
Magazines?
Yeah, like a bunch of old...
Military magazines?
No.
Oh.
Like a bunch of old Clubhouse Junior and Brio and...
That's cool.
Probably some other kids' magazines.
That's wild.
Thrown in there. Well, and my dad was in the Air Force.
Air Force, right?
Which
in Alaska or where?
I think it was North Carolina first because that's where I was born. And then we moved to Alaska for like 4 years.
Wow.
But I don't remember him being in the military.
You were born at a young age as well.
I was not in the same era as you. I think that, yeah. Anyway, so we have a great respect for the men and women we know who serve and their spouses, but we don't have actual experience as a couple in the military. No. So we really wanted to spend an episode encouraging, military couples and people like us who support friends and family who are in the military and help. I'm just lost for words here.
Yeah.
We want to be helpful and encouraging. So we wanted to bring in some experts.
Right.
We wanted to bring in friends who have been there.
Right.
And can speak from experience. So today we have Mike and Carlie Kercheval on the podcast. They spent years of their marriage as a military couple. And in today's interview, they share what that was like, how they depended on God through it, and offer encouragement for other military couples. So I shared a little bit of their bio in the intro, but here's more about Mike and Carlie. So, as we mentioned, they're trained Christian marriage counselors, certified marriage coaches and mentors, and best-selling authors. They are also Bible teachers, podcasters, speakers, and marriage event organizers. They have done a lot.
They certainly have.
And they do a lot.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
They've been married for 24 years, and they have 3 kids. And I first met Carlie years ago when we were both writing for one of the same websites. And I just really love her heart for Jesus, for her husband and her kids, and for marriage.
Right.
So she and Mike have spent the last 20 plus years helping hundreds of couples achieve true connection and intimacy in marriage.
That's pretty amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So after a short break, we'll listen to our interview with Mike and Carlie. Hi, Mike and Carlie. We are so grateful that you guys can be on the TMUS podcast. So we love to hear stories of how couples met. But since we have kind of a short podcast, I have a challenge for you. Can you tell us in like 3 minutes or less how God brought you guys together?
Yeah, we can actually. Yeah. I can make it extremely simple. We met at a campus Bible study I was hosting at Washington State University. And really, Michael came by way of introduction. His best friend's name is Curtis.
Yep.
And we had class together. Him and I had a business law class together. And I invited Curtis to the study. He asked if he could bring his buddy Mike, and the rest is history. That's simple.
And also, to go along with what Carlie is saying, we had several Bible studies. We, and over a course of time, my best friend Curtis, he's not naturally, how do I say it? He's not an extrovert where he's like outgoing. So he's more introvert, and nothing's wrong with that. But we noticed that one of the times we were doing our Bible study, he was just like, we were praying together. And next thing you know, he was saying small little things, but he wasn't completing his sentences. And as we were praying together, I guess God told him to grab each of our hands because he was in the middle. And next thing you know, he put our hands together, and all, as soon as our hands touched, things started happening, in a good way.
That is so cool. That is amazing.
Did he know before you guys knew then?
He didn't know. He said that God, he just felt really, because Curtis is not that person that says God says if God didn't say. Some people say that all the time. And it's like, oh, that clearly wasn't God.
Yeah.
We knew Curtis was like, I kept hearing the Lord say to put your hand. Because at first I was resisting. I'm like, what are you doing? Like I was pulling, But then I just felt this peace.
Yeah.
And so Curtis didn't necessarily know what God was igniting through and activating through that act of obedience at the time. But like Mike said, things just started happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's so wonderful, so beautiful when there's a spiritual foundation to your relationship. That is so cool.
It was fun. So did we do good? Did we get it in enough time?
Yeah, I think it was well under 3 minutes.
Yeah.
So, okay. So, well, you guys, you're civilians now. Mike, you enlisted in the Army during your marriage. Could you guys share what your marriage looked like during those years? Like, what challenges did you face as a couple, and how did the Lord help you navigate some of them?
Yeah, I think one of the things that Mike and we had a challenge right away. 7 days before Michael left on his first year-long deployment to Iraq, I had a stillborn son. So that was something that was really difficult because nothing can prepare you for loss or tragedy. Right. But one of the biggest challenges I think during that time was like I had to really remain focused on just building him up because it's a scary thing, right? To go to war for the first time or any time really. Mm-hmm. And I had to be strong for Hannah because at the time we only had one child. And I had to also allow myself time to grieve. And so one of the things that Mike established before he left, it was amazing, you guys, this was really cool, is he had tapes. So back then he would record on like cassette tapes.
Yep.
And it wasn't not videotapes yet, but just cassette tapes. And he would like read the Bible to me or to Hannah and pray for Hannah, read stories, just decree things over her life, speak the word over her life, teach her lessons that were relevant to that time frame. Yeah. And so I think one of our biggest challenges during that time was just not being able to connect and to pray and to talk as things were going on. I also had faced a mild heart attack. There was just a lot of things, but I couldn't reach out for help. It was Jesus. I couldn't reach out to Michael is a better way to put it. So that was challenging.
And to go along with what you're saying, Carlie, as far as us dealing with the loss of a baby, from my point of view as a soldier, I had to focus on going to a combat zone in which I trained for, but I never experienced. I had to try to put aside something as precious as what just happened and say, you know what, I have a job to do. I need to go and be focused, alert, don't get complacent. And I remember clearly inside I was hurting, but on the outside, I was just like, on the outside, I had that I guess that tough guy exterior saying, we're going to work through this. But I remember 3 months into my deployment, I was in my little sleeping area and I just started crying because it finally had the time for me to process that child will never be born and us to ever hold it. And next thing you know, I'm just releasing it to God. And also, Carlie and we had to trust God in the limited time, because usually when I called her, I had about 5 or 10 minutes on the phone because everything was censored. You had time limits, and there's times when if there was an attack on our base or someone got hurt or killed, you couldn't talk to people for maybe up to 2 weeks. So we had to learn to trust God in that limited time to hit the big topics and leave out the fluff, get to the point and trust God that he would help us still connect, still build faith and grow together.
Yeah.
Wow. In addition to phone calls, were you able to write letters? You had like video conversations, that kind of thing?
Yes, we definitely, and some of the listeners might be aware of this, we use Skype like crazy. When Skype was popular, Skype was like our go-to, because it's one thing when you're on the phone, I mean, I can hear her voice, but it's another thing when we can look at each other in the eyes and just see what's going on. She can see right through my exterior. Usually I'm in a computer lab with other soldiers, and they're having conversations. But when I see her eyes, I just started melting because that's the connection point. That the outlet with Skype really helped out. And we did write letters, but Skype was something that we could, quickly connect, eyes connect and just be able to see what's going on.
Yeah, that was awesome. That was like the highlight. Now, usually though, there was only certain times we could do that on his end.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times it was when Hannah was sleeping. So it was tough.
That's right.
Like, did you see my daddy? And I'm like, there was times where I was tempted to say no because my heart was broken because I didn't want to have to tell her that she missed him again. But I think we started waking her up. Yeah. And then, she was involved in the letters, but Mike was a letter writing machine. Okay. Yeah. I didn't know the man could write like that until he.
I didn't either.
So that was nice.
Yeah.
That's cool. Do you still have all the letters?
I do.
Yeah, Carlie does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I kept them. Mm-hmm.
And she also kept, I know for our first appointment, there was, just a lot of things that was going on in the news. So she kept a lot of the newspaper clippings or the magazine articles just as something for us to reflect upon.
Yeah. Yep.
That's awesome. And you guys just celebrated, was it like 20, how many years?
24.
24. Yeah. Yes.
I love that. That's amazing. I mean, some of the things that you just talked about, you walked about, I mean, it's hard to even imagine, walking through all of those things, right? One after another. But you guys spend a lot of your energy now helping other couples. And one thing that you said you've learned that is everyone can have a happy marriage if they're willing to put in the necessary work. So what does that necessary work look like, especially for couples who might be struggling to stay connected or to communicate effectively?
The first thing that I want to kind of, preface around the word happy, because I know it's kind of controversial when it comes to, the Christian marriage world, but it really is a byproduct of God's goodness. Mm-hmm. And so when we approach couples counseling, because, we both, I say finally, just because we've been counseling couples for decades, but like we finally got the letters behind the name and got the master's in counseling, to go with all of that in the last few years. And one of the ways that God's taught us to approach this when we counsel couples is first and foremost to find their connection points.
Yes.
Because a lot of times people want to push, communicate, or you see things like this, or here's a bunch of scriptures that you guys need to stand on, or, you got to follow this model. And if that were true, we wouldn't need Jesus. If we could just have a model and have these frameworks and these outlines, wouldn't that just be amazing, right? Because then everything would be so easy. But with us, it's really finding that connection point first with God. Mm-hmm. Because what we find, a lot of people that come to us, as a matter of fact, we have a couple that we'll be counseling later this evening. And one of the things that we find is they lose somewhere in there. They lose their relationship and faith in God because they're so hurt. Mm-hmm. So when we find those connection points again, God, Holy Spirit led, He will show us ways that they're not connecting with God. And then He'll say, here's this connection point, or here's this. And then it starts happening for the two of them.
Yes.
So as simple as that may sound, it's not that easy because every couple's different. Man, we have a lot of, we pray specifically for the hardest marriage cases to come our way.
Yes.
Because that brings the most glory to God in our eyes. That's how we see it. And so when we definitely are, those prayers are being answered. I will just say that.
They definitely are. And also, to go along with that is also us being patient, because a lot of times when the couples come together, it's kind of like, this is my terminology, it's kind of like the blame game. This is what they're doing wrong. And they might touch upon what they're doing right, but it's not as detailed. And the thing that I praise God for is creating an environment where people can express themselves, get it all out of their system. And then we're able to ask questions, because a lot of times there's things going on beneath the surface, things that might have happened in childhood that they're really not bringing it up to the front. But as we talk to them, get to know them, then they're going to be like, man, maybe so-and-so, I remember experienced this growing up, and maybe this is why I'm triggered around certain things or certain words. And so we're able to just create an environment where they're not feeling judged, and looking down upon, for them to know it's okay to be a Christian and hurt and have issues, but to point them back to Jesus.
Yeah. And I think real quickly, I would also want to add, just to answer the original question, is it really just looks like a lot of looking in the mirror, being honest with where you're at and not trying to pretend, because we've always told our children, like, we only deal in reality. We can't grow from a place that we're not really at yet. We need to be honest with ourselves. And as our clients realize, it's very painful. It's very, very painful just to admit your faults at times, especially in a relationship as tender and as intimate as marriage. Yeah. Because they feel like failures. But as they continue to do that, God comes in and heals them in those deepest places. And we have seen the most miraculous testimonies come forward out of this ministry.
So I had a question that I had come up with before our conversation. It seems kind of trivial now in light of the deep thoughts that you're sharing now. But that said, one of the things that Ashleigh and I like is the communication sandwich, little technique for, broaching something that might be a little more difficult to talk about. Are there maybe one or two sort of easy suggestions or recommendations that you tell your clients that you really find helpful in your own relationship?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few. And one of them is the simple act of just looking at each other, like being knee to knee. Yeah. When you do not feel like it.
What do you mean by that?
So we're facing each other and our knees are facing each other, like in the midst of conflict. Because that seems to be the place where we start off with couples typically that come to us when it comes to communication. It's always conflict. It's not, we have great conversations and we just want to share that. It's like, you guys, we can't even stand each other, look at each other. So Mike and I in our own relationship have used what we call the knee to knee technique, where our knees are touching. We're that close in that close capacity. And we're looking at each other and we're answering questions that we don't really want. I don't want to say how awesome Mike is when I'm mad at him. I don't want to share the moment when I fell in love with him or what's my favorite thing about him. And it's not easy to do, but we found that it really does do something about melting down the walls quickly when a spouse can open up and say in the midst of their pain or in the midst of a major conflict that this is it. And so then you start to see God at work because he's reminding them of the connection that he designed with the way they met and just all of those things. So I think that's one in particular that.
Yes. Also, the other thing I would say would be active listening. Now, I want to build a little bit of context around that because of my personality, and there could be married couples out there that some of the spouses are more vocal and they want to deal with conflict as it arises. And there's some people that don't want to deal with conflict right away. They need time to process. I was typically, especially in the first few years of our marriage, that whenever there was conflict, whether I didn't change the light bulb right or I didn't do something right, I wanted to kind of bounce and leave the room. And next thing you know, my wife, she's almost 5'2", she's following me to the next room, but I didn't communicate like I need some time to process. So going along with the active listening, when you're knee to knee, when we're knee to knee and when couples are knee to knee, we also encourage them to not try to interrupt the other spouse. Let that spouse that's talking, let them talk without interrupting or trying to interject. And it also teaches them the importance of active listening. Can you listen even if you're offended or hurt about something? Are you patient enough to allow your spouse to express him or herself through the process? And it's not easy. It's not like it's, okay, I did it, check the box. There's things that go on. They have to experience a little bit of conflict and seeing what they really feel about that because some spouses don't know what their spouse is thinking or feeling because this might be an activity they've never done, but because it comes out, they're working through it and they're like, hey, if we can get through this, we can get through something else.
So you say active listening. It's kind of funny because in this morning's sermon, our pastor used the phrase, listen to understand. And so often we find ourselves listening so we know how to respond or listening so we know whether we agree with someone or not.
Yes.
But listen to understand is pretty profound.
It's powerful.
Yeah. Our pastor was talking about operating in reality too. You like you guys were talking about, you have to operate in reality if you're going to actually address things and work through it. So Ted and I haven't been in the military, but we have friends who have served or are serving. What are some ways that couples like us or friends and family can better support loved ones that are in the military?
That's a good question.
Yeah, really good question.
And I don't think it's ever changed in terms of what I know from like my great grandfather was in World War I and World War II. And then when it was time, Mike's dad was in Vietnam, and obviously Mike was in a different era, up into friends that we have now. I think the biggest thing that we can do for them is just check in on them, not assume by their social media posts or by what somebody else says or, that they're okay. I found as a wife, a lot of people, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but a lot of people were so hyper fixated on Michael, but it was like, I wouldn't say pretend, but I had to kind of push some things to the side to make sure that when we talked, I wasn't bringing up all the problems at home. Because like he said earlier, he had to be focused on the mission and alert. He couldn't be over there, upset with somebody that maybe did something to me or, just any of those kind of trivial things that we go through on a daily basis. And so there were times where I felt like I was alone. I had nobody to go to, and I was like holding all these things in that I couldn't share with him so I could support him. So he was well supported by friends, family, by me.
Yeah.
But then there was times where I was really struggling. So I would also say to check in on the families, especially when their loved ones are deployed. Kind of like with everything, you don't know what to expect until you get there. But there are some very interesting things that can go on, and the way the enemy lies to us. I mean, every night I knew it wasn't God, and it was definitely not me. Just every day, just, so-and-so's husband passed away. Yours is next. Just all these crazy thoughts that would kind of come out of nowhere. And so people just checking in on the soldier, on their families, even the children.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of things that the children don't know how to express and won't express unless they trust you. So I think just the checking in is beautiful. Like that, just that alone is golden.
That's very important. From a soldier's point of view, is a lot of times, at least I experienced this. I can't say every soldier, but I experienced when I first got back from deployment, I kind of already had that exterior, like I'm okay. I can transition right back into being a civilian or back into not in a war environment. So I would quickly have a script. I'm fine. Everything's good, But as I was saying it, I was hurting because I was still mentally in combat, but even though I was physically stateside or home and back on base. And so a continual thing of, you might have checked, someone might have said, thank you for your service, and not to give up. Don't assume that soldier's fine that day and you don't check up on them. Check on them 2 or 3 months later. How's your family doing? That's one thing I know for me. Family means a lot to me. So when you check on me and you ask about my family, I'll have more respect for you as a soldier, because then I know it's not just my uniform that I'm wearing. You really care about me as a person.
So when we lost our baby to miscarriage, we had a friend who didn't just ask us, so how are you doing? What can we do for you? He got us a couple of pizzas and brought them over to us.
Yeah.
Just took the initiative.
Wow.
Is there a place for that in, supporting the spouses who are back home, just taking the initiative to do something?
Yes. It's interesting you say that, because after the loss of the one that we shared, because we had a miscarriage later, but the first loss, there was one of his closest friends from the military showed up at my door. He was standing there in his uniform and he had 2 buckets of KFC. That's all he knew.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm sorry.
Yes.
We are so sorry for your loss.
Yes.
My wife and I wanted to make sure you had food tonight.
So practical.
Yes. And that meant everything in the world. I just remember breaking down and just crying, because sadly they had lost a couple babies to SIDS. And so they knew that pain. And even though he didn't have the words, that was okay. He wasn't that gesture of kindness, just like your friend. That was more than any words could have ever done for us. And so, yes, I think that the spouses, it's one thing, and everybody's different, right? So like, I am super independent, and I don't mean that, and it's not a prideful thing. It's just the way God designed me. And so I do get a lot of things done. And, I like to be able to have that space and time to process. But like, you just kind of know the people. And then the Holy Spirit will tell us, right? Like, go check on so-and-so.
Yeah.
And when their names come up, give them a call, send them this without even thinking twice. I'd say if people feel that God is showing them to do that, then do it.
And I also want to add this. I think it's still part of the question, but this is very important. I mentioned this. There's a very high percentage of, veterans, people in the military that struggle with depression and suicide, a very high percentage. So the importance of continually asking and checking up is important, because a lot of times us as a soldier, we kind of create an invisible wall where we're maybe stuck back in our uniform if you're out of the military, but there's still issues. There's things that you were exposed to while you were in that you're still trying to process. And one way to combat the suicidal thoughts and the tendencies is for people to care and to check in on a continual basis.
All of that is like so helpful, because I know for us, when you haven't walked through it yourself, sometimes you can second guess, okay, is this going to be helpful, or am I asking too much? Am I checking in too much? So that's super helpful. So you guys have a lot of fantastic resources for couples. So where can listeners find those, and where can they connect with you guys online?
Well, the hub of everything is at marriagelegacyuniversity.com.
Yeah.
You can find everything there. We have several different podcasts. I have one just for wives, and I have an event just for wives, and we have things together. We have the Praying Couple podcast. There's just other things that you can find there. And in terms of connecting, the best place to be around us and where we pour the most into is our email list. We do have a free 5-day communication challenge that people can sign up for on the website. You'll be able to find it. It's everywhere on there. So that's the best place, because we love our subscribers, because we understand that they really, really want to have everything that God has designed for their marriage.
Yes.
And we just love pouring into them and sharing just candid looks into our life.
That was such a great conversation.
Yes, it was.
And we are definitely going to have them on again.
I want them over for lunch or dinner or something. I know they live so far away, but they're really cool.
They live on the other different coast from
Different
us.
coast.
Yeah. Well, they have so much wisdom to share. And I think we're going to have them back in the future to talk about having a praying marriage, because that's not something we've talked about in depth on the podcast.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. Okay. Well, after this break, we'll be back with this week's Us Time Challenge. All right, so Ted.
Yes.
For this week's Us Time Challenge.
Yes.
It's good I don't have to talk much in this episode this week, because I keep stumbling over my words.
Yeah, we each have days.
Right. Okay, so those of you listening, we're going to encourage you to go to Mike and Carlie's website, marriagelegacyuniversity.com, and to sign up for their free 5-day marriage communication challenge. It's really easy to find once you go to that website, and I'll have a link to that in the show notes.
Good. That sounds like a good challenge.
Yeah. I mean, maybe we should do it too.
And it's free.
Free is good.
Good and free.
The economy right now makes no sense. But that's a conversation for a different day.
For a different day.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for joining us on the Team Us podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast, and we'd love to have you leave a review over at Apple Podcasts. We're looking forward to the next time as we keep talking about how grace, commitment, and cooperation can help couples live the everyday moments of marriage together.
Team Us with Ted and Ashleigh Slater is a production of Life Audio and Salem Media. If you liked what you heard today, please take a second to rate and review the podcast in your favorite podcast app so that more listeners like you can find the show. For more faith-filled, inspirational podcasts, visit us at lifeaudio.com.